Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast, a podcast about stage musicals that have been legally filmed and publicly distributed. The Filmed Live Musicals website contains information on nearly 200 musicals that have been captured live. Check it out at filmedlivemusicals.com. And now, on with the show. Welcome to another episode of the Filmed Live Musicals podcast. I'm your host, Luisa Lyons, and my guest today is Joe Gfaller, Managing Director of the Metro Theater Company in St. Louis. Currently celebrating its 50th season, the mission statement of the company reads, "Inspired by the intelligence and emotional wisdom of young people, we create professional theater, foster inclusive community, and nurture meaningful learning through the arts." The company has staged over 35 original works for young people and toured nearly 40 productions across the US, Canada, Italy, Japan, and Taiwan, and almost every school district in St. Louis. It's also one of my personal favorites for streaming film live theater. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
My pleasure. So to start us off with, what made you fall in love with theater?
Oh, golly, that's a great question. You know, I actually have an entertainingly mixed early history with theater. My first memory of going to a play was somewhere in a little community theater. Maybe it was a small regional theater on a lake in northern New Jersey, and they were doing The Wizard of Oz, and I must have been 3 or something like that. And I guess I got very scared when the lights went down. So I started screaming. Maybe I was younger than 3, because I don't think 3-year-olds scream that much. But I started screaming. And the woman playing Glinda the Good Witch, I guess, opened this play somehow. And so she walked on stage and she said, "Could someone take the screaming child out of the theater?" As the very first experience that I had. So it's kind of lovely and very much full circle that now I have the privilege and honor of leading a wonderful theater company for youth and families, because I would like to believe that young people who attend our plays will have a very different first memory and experience of theater than I might have. But after overcoming that childhood trauma, I guess you could call it, I did very much come to love theater. I grew up in northern New Jersey, so watching television, all the commercials were for Broadway shows, so you were sort of surrounded by that. And my parents had lived in Manhattan. Well, I guess they lived in Queens. They lived in New York City before they moved out to New Jersey to start a family, and so they had gone to a great deal of theater. So I saw original cast albums and as actual albums, in my house growing up and things like that. So it was definitely part of the environment that I came up in, and started acting, in plays in middle school-ish, I guess. And the bug caught, and I've moved through many roles in theater and in the arts throughout my career. But I think at heart, what I love about it most is it brings people together, and it brings people who probably wouldn't otherwise gather together in one common space to share one common experience. And I think we really just need more of that in the world these days.
Oh, yes, please, and thank you. Did you attend a lot of Broadway theater while you were growing up?
Not until I got to maybe high school. I think that we grew up in a decidedly middle-class household, let's say, and so it was there, but it wasn't always economically accessible all the time. And at some point along the way, there were some opportunities to go to the theater through school. I think the first thing I saw on Broadway was the Nathan Lane Faith Prince revival of Guys and Dolls in what would have been 1993, maybe. The summer after 8th grade was the first thing I saw on Broadway, and then probably got to see 1 or 2 things a year after that, because occasions would present themselves. But I didn't necessarily grow up being the kid who went into the city by train every other weekend and see another show, but envious of those who could.
It's so crazily expensive, and something that we will be covering today when we're talking about accessibility and making theater accessible to people. Were you aware of theater on television, like on PBS or things like that when you were growing up?
I absolutely was. I actually think that when it came time for us at Metro to sort of make this pivot towards streaming, which was largely the result of the circumstances of the pandemic, but tied to a number of other strategic priorities as well, it was very easy for me to make the case to myself as well as to others, because there's an argument to be made that says, well, when you're seeing it streaming, when you're seeing it mediated in any way, it's not the same thing. And so why is that? Why is that good? If you're in the business of inspiring people to gather and share common breath, right, and to gasp at once, how is streaming helping people get there? And I could say from pretty easy experience that, looking at great performances as a kid on PBS, I probably saw more theater in a mediated format for years until I actually got to the point where I'd seen as much live to kind of balance it out. And at an earlier point in my career, I worked for the opera company here in St. Louis. And I can say in very good conscience that if it wasn't for watching the Met on PBS as a kid once in a while, I wasn't a devotee that, tuned in every single Sunday at 2 or whenever it aired. But I would certainly catch, a healthy bit of it. We only had 6 channels those days or so. And that was my first exposure to opera. And I could say in very good conscience that if I hadn't seen opera on television through PBS, I would have not developed an affinity or an interest in attending opera as an adult. So, and there are very few 8-year-olds who are buying tickets to see opera themselves. So if you're trying to reach people at an early age and create exposure, I think it's incredibly critical. Sometimes it's easy to forget that theater might be just as inaccessible to hundreds of thousands of young people, to countless people in our country, and seem like something that is unapproachable, seem like something that would require a level of economic resources or knowledge or skill to really appreciate. And being able to experience it in a mediated form, whether that's on television or now through streaming, I believe ultimately helps people to find a deeper connection and then to better discern for themselves what they're going to pay to see. Because the worst thing in the world is if you've never attended a play before, or an opera, or a ballet, or any number of sort of opportunities in the performing arts, you don't get to test the waters a little bit. What if the first thing you see just isn't for you? You might leave that experience thinking, well, I guess I don't like contemporary dance, or I guess I don't like symphonic music, when in practice, there's a million versions of that discipline. There are a million ways to create art or tell a story in any of those disciplines. And you might just have caught one that didn't line up with you. Other people in the room might have loved it, but taste is highly personal. So I do think that mediated experience is incredibly valuable because it helps us to form our own sense of taste and preference. And then when we buy tickets to whatever it costs on Broadway today, I have gotten some cheap seats lately for even $49, but I've paid way more than that for seats over the years. You're buying something that you will enjoy because you've already gotten to test those waters through these other formats.
And speaking of testing the waters, and you alluded to earlier wearing many different hats in your journey through theater. So you've worked as a director and a media director for various companies. Can you talk us through your journey that has led you to Metro Theater Company?
Sure. So growing up, I acted in the shows at my school, which is what most people who have an interest in theater might do. I assistant directed in my high school a Moliere play, and I said, I'd love to direct something. And they said, sure, we've never had someone do that who is a high school student here, but go for it and propose something. And so I said, I'd love to do a production of Les Miserables. And they all looked at me and said, you realize you're a senior in high school, right? And I said, yeah, I do. But if we can fit it to within a 90-minute block, because we had blocks scheduled like at my high school, if we could fit it into these 90 minutes, would that work? I said, well, if you can cut it down. I said, can you get the rights? And I think the administration said, yeah, we'll get the rights. I have no confidence they got the rights. But that didn't matter, hopefully, in the grand scheme of things. And so I had that experience in high school, went on to college, and continued to act and to direct. But I had the great fortune to have a work study position at the American Repertory Theater while I was an undergrad in college, working in the marketing and press offices, and learned so much from the people around me. And at the time, Bob Brustein was the artistic director at American Repertory Theater. He taught some coursework for undergrads where I was in school as well. So I got to study a little bit with him and really broaden my understanding of not just what theater can do, but what theater does in community specifically, which is so important. And so, you think about what Ibsen did. He wasn't just writing plays, he was helping to create a national identity, right? You think the same thing is certainly true for Verdi writing opera in Italy. He was creating a national identity. And so this idea that theater can be more than just a great story on a stage, but a way for a community to understand itself and to grow through that, I found very powerful. So I had an opportunity after finishing undergrad to become the director of marketing of a smaller theater in Atlanta, which primarily focused on work that was grounded in sort of social, political, and spiritual issues and values. The company is called Seven Stages. They do all kinds of really wonderful things, I think, still today. And in the time I was there, we both produced and presented. So we created lots of great new plays, but also presented, very hot button artists like Tim Miller and Karen Finley and the like. So really got to see sort of the gamut of all of that work. And I continued to work as a director through that time, directed a number of productions at Seven Stages, and was directing all across the Atlanta region at all the really amazing companies that are part of the ecosystem there, doing largely regional premieres of works by Caryl Churchill and Christopher Durang and David Mamet, Adaya Moon, a bunch of other wonderful playwrights. So worked in both spaces pretty consistently, moved on to a role at the Alliance Theater, which is the flagship regional theater for the Southeast, another amazing company.
We've also been streaming amazing work in the past few years.
Yeah. Yes, there's the Susan Booth was an amazing leader for them. I'm so excited that the Goodman has recently taken her back in a way. And I know that the Alliance will find an amazing successor for her. But she has been a visionary, I think, in the field in so many ways. And it was amazing to work with and under her when I was there for the time I was at the Alliance. And then an opportunity presented itself through a recruiter, and I had not been really recruited before or like headhunted. And there was something so lovely about the experience of someone saying, like, we believe you should do this job. We're going to convince you to do this job in this other place. So I had the opportunity to go to Opera Theater of St. Louis, where I worked for about a decade, and what brought me from Atlanta to St. Louis. I had in college done some work in opera. I had been the board president for our undergraduate opera company. And what was unique is that that company was focused on producing work entirely in English. So in translation, or English being the original language of the libretto. And as a freshman in college, I had played Il Commendatore in Don Giovanni, which was strange because I had never performed in an opera before, and I didn't think I sung opera. I still don't know that I actually do sing opera, but I did sing that role. And the whole time I felt like I was a blind man working my way through the dark to try to figure out what was going on, because I had seen the Met, on television. I'd never been to the Met. I'd never been to an opera before. So my first experience with opera was being in an opera at that point. And at the end of the process, the person who was at the time the president of the board reached out and said, Joe, would you be interested in joining this board? And I said, why would you want me to do that? I don't know anything about opera other than what I just did for the last, 7 weeks. And he said something to me that was quite profound and stuck with me through so much of the rest of the work that I have done in marketing and community affairs and media relations and all of that, which is, he said, well, all of us who are involved with this company, love opera very much, and have had opera, in our lives since we were children. Mind you, these people were 20 years old, so there was something strange. But, since we were children. Well, yes, this is the problem. Sometimes people might have. They might think everyone is so like, since birth, I know this is my calling. And I said, well, that's wonderful. And said, yes, but you haven't, and we need to learn how to talk to people who don't know anything about opera, or this art form won't survive. And this thing we love won't matter anymore, because there won't be anyone to watch it. So would you please consider joining the board of our undergraduate opera company and helping to be the decoder ring to help us talk to the people who are most of the rest of this campus who don't know anything about opera and don't think it's for them. And so that exchange in 1997 or 98 then led me to say, opportunity is calling. I have worked in other spaces in the performing arts. I think of opera as a highly specialized form of theater, personally. And I said, well, that sounds like an amazing opportunity. So I had a great time being at OTSL for the years that I was there. And then sort of in the similar sort of turning of fate and time, the opportunity presented itself here at Metro Theater Company in St. Louis. And I was ultimately so drawn to this company and to the mission of this company because at heart, what Metro does is about creating access at the most critical moment in people's lives to this art form, and is about how this art form can be deeply transformative in helping young people not just see the world, but understand themselves, and through that become better, more empathetic, more thoughtful, hopeful, kind, caring, understanding human beings. And I believe that our sector exists in the nonprofit sector to do a public good. That's why people are allowed to get tax credits for giving nonprofits money, right? Because we are doing a public good. And it felt to me that where could one do greater good in the long term for this community and for the public that we are intended to serve than in this space, particularly in a space where we do serve truly everyone in this region. We have among the most representative audience, I think, in St. Louis when it comes to age, when it comes to ethnicity, when it comes to geography. And I think that's so critical that your audiences and that the community of support around you actually looks like the community you serve, because it can be very easy, I think, in the nonprofit sector for us in the arts in particular to serve the audiences we have and perpetuate audiences that are those same people. And in time, that means that the audiences we're serving are a very narrow subset of our community. And at some point, there's risk that I think arts organizations can stop doing the greater community good and be focused on doing good for, a small number of patrons who are ultimately the ones paying the bills. And I love that Metro for 50 years has never hewn to that model. And has been deeply committed to always make sure what's on our stage tells stories that are resonant and right for young people and creates access for all of those young people, and not just those who are in this school district or in this tax bracket or on this side of the segregation line in the geography of our community, which is still geographically very real in St. Louis and in so many communities in our country. So that's a long answer to my 25-ish, I don't know how many year journey it's been now, to get to here.
It's so fascinating, and so I love how much of it has come full circle, and how what you're doing now really speaks to that conversation that you had with the person from the opera company, that the former president, that opening it up to people who haven't necessarily been going since birth, and whose parents also have been going since birth, and their parents, it's this, like you say, it's a cycle of, the same kind of people end up going, or end up being able to afford it, or end up having access. And so being a part of a company whose mission is to change that is really extraordinary.
You. I feel that, and sometimes it's nice to be reminded of it too. So thank you for the reminder.
Oh, you're welcome. So let's fast forward to 2020. Was that the first time that Metro Theater Company decided to stream work?
It was. And we came to that place, as did many of our peers, for the very sort of obvious reasons of necessity that came with the start of the COVID pandemic. But I will say that because we live at the intersection of arts and education, as we were working on our strategic plan leading up to the pandemic, I came to Metro late summer, early fall of 2019. So I had about 6 months, and then the pandemic hit. But happily, in those 6 months, the board had said very clearly, our organization needs a strategic plan. It needs a new strategic plan. Our old strategic plan is 1 page long, and we're not doing it. So we need a new one, and you need to make that happen as quickly as you can. And so the first, I had about a month, and then after that first month, we rolled up our sleeves and all were working together on the strategic plan. And it was actually very helpful because we kind of knew what direction all of our oars were pointing in. We knew what we stood for. We knew why we were doing the work we were doing collectively and what our vision was for where we wanted to go. And then when the pandemic stopped everything, we'd kind of already painted the box we wanted to work inside of, which sometimes increases the ability to be creative, because if the opportunities are limitless, it can be very difficult to know where to start. But when you have set 4 key pillars for what you stand for and what you're going to do, you then say, here's the reality of the world we're in. How do we still do these things? Not what can we do instead? Not, and obviously young people very much during that time and still right now very deeply need connection to the kind of work that we do. So we weren't going to just hibernate at that point, because we would have certainly not served our community if that had been the call we made at the time. And one of the tenets and the learning pillar of our plan was to see by year 4 of the plan how we could increase our knowledge and skills in virtual learning. And we said, well, guess what? Distance learning is happening right now everywhere. Distance might be 3 doors down, but we can't actually enter the doors. So it's still distance learning. And happily, the plan wasn't quite finished before the pandemic hit. So we did some work on the plan and moved things around. And surprise, surprise, distance learning and virtual content to expand live experience, which was, believe it or not, actually in the plan before we knew we were going to have to do it in 2 months, moved from year 4 of the plan to year 1 of the plan. And we certainly, a piece of our plan that was in year 4, we did not have, every T crossed and I dotted, on January of 2020, but we were like, well, we've got some idea of the shape of what this might be, maybe. And then we very quickly learned how to give it true shape. And the very first thing that we did was our extraordinary education team, which is led by Karen Bain and Jen Zofel, said, all right, we're going to, since we can't be in classrooms at all, and we don't know for how long this will be, the first thing that we did streaming was to create a daily video series called Learning Through Play in the Arts. And we made it completely free. Every day we dropped a new video, and it was designed to help both teachers and parents who were responsible for home-based learning during that time have arts-integrated curriculum that they could work into anything else they were doing in that day. And each video was 3 to 5 minutes long. They were very bite-sized, but the idea is that every classroom could access this if they wanted to. And we were blown away by the kind of reach that this had in the immediate term, because everyone was desperate to find content that could continue to further our arts-based learning. And so many parents were suddenly now homeschool teachers and had no idea where to start. So this became a really great foundation for us. And then the next step that we took when it came to streaming was to look at what we had in the metaphorical vault, right? Like they talk about the Disney vault. We saw what we had at the vault. And luckily, we had partnered for a number of years with HEC, Higher Education Channel, which is a nonprofit television and broadcast network here in St. Louis. And they will create short video pieces that can go into schools to connect with any number of disciplines, certainly not just the arts. But over the course of Metro's relationship with HEC over the years, they had filmed primarily for our archival purposes, but also so they could have a couple of good excerpts to put into some of the programming that they were doing. They had filmed a few of our productions. And so we went through our vault and said, well, which of these productions would we have any hope of getting the rights to stream in the short term? Because they already exist. They weren't filmed with the intent of streaming. And so some of them, you watch and you say, wow, something clearly happened just to the left of that camera shot. Oh, well, like that's, it is what it is. Like, but they were very solid, representations of the shows that we had done. And 2 of those plays, one by Idris Goodwin called And in This Corner Cassius Clay, which is basically sort of the origin story of the young Muhammad Ali. We were able to secure the rights to. And another play that we were supposed to tour that spring to the Kennedy Center, a world premiere we'd commissioned by Eric Coble called The Girl Who Swallowed a Cactus. We had both of those, and we said, well, we have these. We've got the rights. We will pay all artists involved residuals based on what our earnings might be as we move forward. And we worked out those agreements with every artist, and then went ahead and that summer started streaming work that had been, coming out of the vault. And those were sort of early efforts that were sort of grounded in making sure we were doing it right. Legally by all of our artists, for sure, but not grounded in filming for the purpose of streaming. And then as that first year of the pandemic progressed, the next things that we did, we had a project called our COVID-19 Memory Project, where we invited people in our community and across the country to share their stories, because we believed creating this kind of a time capsule could ultimately create meaningful theater that would be valuable for young people in the future. So in the immediate term, we did some dramatic readings on Zoom of some of these. And then we partnered with the Missouri History Museum, which is a program called Teens Make History. And together they created a series of short plays based on our COVID-19 Memory Project and a project the History Museum was collecting, which I think was, I might have this title slightly wrong, but it was something like The Stories of the Pandemic Collection or something like that, but a sort of oral history story that they were collecting for their archives as well. And these teens wrote short plays inspired by this material, and then we aired those as sort of live Zoom plays. As sort of the next wave. We don't usually have youth actors. We usually have professional actors on stage and we perform for youth. But in this case, it serves so many valuable educational opportunities. And it was definitely the right thing to do. So we did that. And then we realized that we were probably not getting back on stage as soon as we hoped. By, a couple months in the pandemic, we're like, well, we thought we were going to be back in the fall. That's not going to happen. Oh, no, well, surely we'll be back by January. That didn't happen either. And so we had to pull back and say, well, then what can we do that isn't just filming actors in a room without the actual energy and experience of live theater? Because that can feel very hollow. And actors thrive on the real-time energy of the space. And when we stream productions today that are, being presented in front of a live audience, you can feel that hopefully at some level in what you're watching on film. And we knew that was going to be missing if we tried to film in a different way. Just say, let's get the theater in film. Also, we were still trying to practice social distancing and masking and all the things we had to do before there were vaccinations. So the next two things that we produced, one was a gift we gave to St. Louis for the holiday season that first year, and it was an all St. Louis reading of A Christmas Carol. And we had sent out to all of our readers copies of the exact same copy of A Christmas Carol. So everyone had the same beautiful red-bound book with gold sort of gilt trim, and they all opened the book, and everybody filmed themselves anywhere from 45 seconds to maybe 3 or 4 minutes of A Christmas Carol that we had sent out. And it was an amazing way to connect with so many people who had made everyone's life in St. Louis better during the pandemic. So we were intentional about not just engaging artists that we would normally work with and that we loved, but also to connect with first responders, to connect with medical professionals. So we had an ER doctor who was treating COVID patients, who is one of our readers reading this. We had the medical director for the St. Louis Fire Department, all reading alongside local professional actors and media personalities, as well as some amazing humans who are from St. Louis, who may or may not be here all the time anymore, but people like Ellie Kemper, who is born, she's raised in St. Louis. I don't think she was born in St. Louis, but she's raised in St. Louis and is an amazing human being. Sterling K. Brown, who was raised in St. Louis, is an amazing human being. Christine Brewer, the opera singer, who is raised here in the St. Louis region, is an amazing human being. Ken Page, who was in the original production of Cats and the voice of Oogie Boogie in Nightmare Before Christmas, right? All these wonderful people. And so folks got to stream this from home and see Christmas Carol Told. We added in a sound design, kind of a lovely score and sort of musicscape to it to connect all the pieces. But it definitely wasn't a play, but it was something that we could do that wasn't filming what should be a play in an environment that wasn't actually the experience in which one should sort of connect with the material. And then the next thing we did, similarly trying to say, well, what can we do that's not a play, but is a play? We did an animated production of a play called Jacked by Idris Goodwin, which we had originally intended to tour to schools that year. But by making it an animated play, actors could very much be socially distanced. And all the work could happen in an incredibly safe environment. And we proceeded with that. And then when we actually got back to producing theater for live audiences, we were the first professional theater in St. Louis to do this, thankfully, partly because we moved outdoors for the first time. But in April of 2021, we did a bilingual production of the Very Hungry Caterpillar show, La Arruga Muy Abriante Espectáculo. And it was originally intended to be indoors, of course, but we moved it to outdoors. We filmed it on the stage that we would have done it indoors. So we ended up running two separate techs, an indoor tech for filming and an outdoor tech for our live audiences. And at that point, still people weren't fully vaccinated. Vaccines were very new, and limited people could get them. So it was a very surreal experience walking into this theater for 550 and everyone desperately trying to keep at least 10 feet apart from each other while trying to film and do notes and all of this. The actors actually were masked for that production on film because we were indoors and we had to be. So that was our first foray. But from that point forward, everything we have produced live, we have filmed for video on demand, and we've continued to stream. So again, I've given you very long answers to what seem like deceptively short questions.
No, I'm eating all of this up. It's so wonderful to understand the trajectory and get fill in the pieces of I'm seeing from a distance the individual productions, but understanding all this backwork is the good stuff. So when did it become the MTC remote initiative?
So that actually began officially thanks to generous support from PNC. So PNC Bank has a program called PNC Arts Alive. They're here in St. Louis. They're in a number of markets with that program. I forget how many. Maybe it's a dozen or so. And they're very focused on programs that can help to grow audiences that are new and innovative. So we were very grateful that when they launched their new cycle, it was a 5-year cycle for funding, instead of the previous model they had, where every year you apply for funding for 1 year. In this new model, over the course of, I think, the 5 years of the cycle, you can apply for 2 years of funding at a time. So you could actually sort of build out a longer range plan for how an innovative idea could then translate into something that may be able to become sustainable. Sometimes a year is just not enough time for something that's a startup concept to then bear fruit. So with great thanks to PNC Arts Alive, we were able to make the commitment to ourselves and to the community that for all of our 49th and our 50th seasons, we would continue streaming because we knew we had the underwriting support to cover the basic costs of being able to film and to distribute and all of the other pieces that come into play when you're streaming.
And you have one of my favorite explanations of accessibility and the program. I'm just going to read it verbatim here. To ensure continued digital accessibility across the St. Louis region and beyond, as part of the PNC Arts Alive funded MTC Remote Initiative, MTC continues online streaming of its main stage productions. MTC is also continuing its Pay What You Wish viewing period for each main stage production, live or streaming, so that economic barriers do not prevent families from experiencing the season's productions. Sensory-friendly, audio-described, and sign language interpreted performances will also be available for main stage productions. Now, if that is not accessibility, I don't know what is.
Thank you.
It's amazing to me how few companies, they have accessibility statements and it doesn't include streaming. And so I would love to hear from you what you think. How do you think streaming opens the doors to people for the theater?
I think there's several pathways. I'll One I touched on earlier, which is just that idea that if you've never attended theater live, the idea, particularly if something's available, pay what you wish, that you can test the waters and you can see, and we can make sure that economic barriers are not in play, and frankly, any perceptual barriers aren't in play, because we're trying to say very clearly, this is for you. This is whoever you are. This is 100% for you. But I also think that there is a challenge that our industry has in that, we're one of the last bastions of, you must arrive by this time, only this time. The play will begin at that time. If you got caught in traffic, you will be shunned, and we will force you to sit somewhere that is not the seat you purchased until such time as we deem it's okay for you to go to the seat you purchased. It might be we don't deem it's okay, and you have to spend the first act watching a play on a monitor in the lobby because you got stuck in traffic, because there was an accident, because you had an issue with childcare, because your babysitter came late, because your child had a tantrum. Any number of normal things that can happen to human beings. So that's like step one. And it's, of course, given what we do, it requires live humans in real time to make truly magical moments happen for audiences. And that can't happen every 3 hours on the dot or start whenever it might work for anyone. But on a structural level, if you work third shift, you can never go. If you're a server at a restaurant and you just got dinner, you can't be there. If you have children who love the arts, but gosh, like they have soccer games, they can't be there for whatever that time frame is. And at a very basic level, even though we all recognize that streaming isn't the identical experience of being live in a room, it's closer than no experience at all. And it absolutely, I think, inspires so many similar feelings about creativity and about all the things kids can learn from seeing a play live. I believe they can learn from seeing a play in a mediated format. And so I think that on a basic accessibility level, by being able to offer this literally anytime you might want to see it, during the window of time we're licensed to be able to share it, is breaking down all of those very practical barriers to attending the arts that come with geography, that come with distance, that come with job, that come with schedule. And my belief is that not my belief, I can see in the data, but I also believe it, that there are people who might see some of our plays live and see other plays streamed. And my assumption is they chose to stream us on this show because their schedule didn't work to come to one of the performances that we had scheduled. Who knows what those reasons are, but they have found a way to still stay engaged and to not feel guilty or feel like they have to completely rearrange their life just because they wanted to see this play and now they've got to get time off from work, or now they've got to move their vacation schedule, or now their kids can't go to band camp because, gosh, their kids have to see this play. Whatever the case may be, we're able to break those barriers down. And I think that in the long term, that will be extremely positive for our art form. And I would like to believe that it'll be very positive for us as a company as well, because we're building that profile to do this. And people who've discovered us when we were streaming during the pandemic, when that was your only option, are still with us now. We have audiences from all over the country that are streaming our work, and that's really powerful and extraordinary. And I know a few of them might have first discovered our work because they heard Sterling K. Brown or Ellie Kemper was in our Christmas Carol, and they're like, "I'll check that out. I love Kimmy Schmidt. I want to see more of this." That's possible. But then they said, "This is great. I value this for my family. We'll keep doing it." And for schools, it's that much more critical, because when you think about how many professional theaters producing work for young audiences there might be in the country, and then you take a little, you try to draw a little circle around those places, assuming the most a bus is going to travel with kids to see a play on a field trip is 30 or 40 minutes. There are huge gaping holes everywhere in our country where young people are not getting the chance to go with their class and to see a professional play. They might get to see some wonderful work that is joyful and community-based, in a community theater environment or anything like that, and that is great. But if we're talking about professional companies, you've got these. It's like Swiss cheese on the map of where the holes are. And what's been lovely is how many schools and districts from far outside of St. Louis have taken our productions on for virtual field trips. And the difference between taking a virtual field trip from us and just, turning on Netflix to whatever might be, age appropriate, is that because we live at the intersection of performing arts and education, we have incredibly responsible learning guides that go with every play we do. So if you're a teacher, you're not just getting this streaming piece, but you're getting all the curriculum you need to prepare the kids for it, as well as to talk about the themes and the lessons well after. And that's, I think, a very unique offering that we have. And the fact that schools in Virginia Beach and in Ontario, Canada, are still streaming our work, even now that in theory it's more possible for buses to get back on the road and for kids to see things live, means probably that those communities don't have something that they think of as being of the same caliber or of the same educational integration in their backyard, and we're now their resource, and I'm very, very happy to be able to be that for all of those districts.
Oh my goodness, I have so many questions and we're running low on time. There's so much I want to
I'll
know
try to answer
about
them shorter. I will stick to a minute or less. Go.
With the so you were talking about the PNC grant and how important it was to the program. What are the financial challenges of being able to stream?
The main financial challenges are ultimately the continued variability in audience trends as we're in this recovery from the pandemic period. So it is very difficult to predict how live or streaming audiences will respond to any particular title at any particular moment. So we've had some titles streaming that have been extraordinary in their reach and in their success. And we've had other titles streaming that on paper and certainly on stage are of equally comparable quality and value and impact, and for whatever reason are less, there's less engagement on the streaming side. So being able to manage the highs and the lows is a big piece. And quite simply, there's time and money that has to be invested, right? And in a very real way, time is probably the most precious of those resources. So for our production artistic teams, making sure that when we film, we're filming in an environment that's best for the people watching at home later, and is also going to best reflect the quality of the show, and is going to set up all of our artists on stage and off stage for the highest level of success possible, is complicated. So we have tried to film, the last day of tech before first audience. So we've tried to let's film during the first audience. We've tried, let's film at the first student matinee. And every one brings its own set of sort of differences to the equation. And so just the mental energy and time to do all of that is a commitment for sure. And then there's the financial risk, because you have to pay up front for all the filming, obviously, and you don't know what the return will be on a show-by-show basis. On something like, there's an amazing production of Last Stop on Market Street that we did last year, which is based on Matt de la Peña's incredible picture book. And that was a piece that was being read by kids everywhere. So you didn't have to be in St. Louis to feel connected to this book or to this show. And it was a wonderfully successful streaming run, an incredibly successful streaming run. But at the same time, thank you. But at the same time, no theater can program a season that is exclusively just the things that you think are going to be blockbusters all the time, right? You have to have balance. And in the TYA space, what's most critical is that we have balance amongst the ages of the young people that we serve, because we can't only do, stage plays based on picture books for young readers, because we also serve middle school kids, right? We also serve, like, we do work for the very young. And so we need to make sure there's work in our season that might be resonant if you aren't yet fully verbal and 18 months old, and of course, some things like that might not translate to streaming quite as well as something that maybe feels more like a proscenium musical, where you expect the camera's going to sit here because the audience always sits there. It's things that are a little bit more interactive, like theater for the very young, take a higher level of creativity to film.
Do you have a outside filming, like a production company coming in, or are you doing it in-house?
So because we already had this wonderful partnership with HEC, Higher Education Channel, before, the team from HEC has been our filming partner so far for everything we've done during the course of the pandemic. And what's nice is that while sometimes the lead producer might change based on availability, the company itself has been working with us now for many years and has been working in this rhythm on streaming for several years. So we've got really great people who know what we're looking for in filming. And what they do, which I love, is they'll set up however many cameras. Lately, it's up to 4 or 5 cameras per shoot. And
That's a
we
lot
will
for a
film.
500-seat theater.
Yes.
Where do you put them?
Many creative places. But they'll set up a live switcher. So in real time while they're filming, they're also editing. And we can then look at that and say, hey, can you use camera 3 for this shot? I think you used camera 4, and I think we lost this as a result. But we're all able to watch in real time while it's happening. So the benefit of that is we are usually looking at a 3 to 4 day turnaround to have a full edit of the show.
That's insane.
And then we have about 2 days to do notes on that full edit. And then we try to get the show up. So we're usually between filming and first broadcast, it's about 7 to 8 days on our productions. And that's, I think, because we have this relationship and we've been able to find that rhythm together, that feels a little bit more turnkey. It always feels like a mad dash, but we're all in the same like sprint together for that week or so. But the royalties not the royalties, excuse me, the licenses that we have on the shows that we're producing extend only till we close the show live. So we want the stream to be up as quickly as it can be, because if it's only up for 10 days, then we're not really making the impact we need to make. And it's probably not going to pay for itself in the long term because the window is too narrow. There's just like you get word of mouth for live, I find we're certainly getting word of mouth on streaming, because sometimes I'll see someone streamed from name of city that I have not seen us stream to before. And then 5 days later, there are 3 more people from name of city who have now bought streaming. And I'm thinking, whoever the first person was liked it and told their friends, because there's no reason for us to suddenly be in Red Wing, Wisconsin, or wherever Red Wing is, with this many people viewing this week. So having a bit of a run for people to tune into is invaluable. And so having as short of a time frame to get to the final edit is equally invaluable. That means that our edits will never look like Hamilton on Disney Plus, but that's part of the economic reality of what we can do.
And I don't think they need to. Like your captures are gorgeous, and not everything needs to be Hamilton. And this is what
Yes.
it worries me that companies think that that's the standard now, because it doesn't have to be. There are so many good captures that they're not slick movies. They're like these kind of almost raw, quickly put together, but like you get the essence of the show. And I love what you said earlier. I'm going to paraphrase it terribly, but it's like seeing it online is better than not at all. It's just the access is so important. One more question to this before we get to my final segment. Do you have what agreements do you have with the cast and crew to be able to film? And do you have to deal with like equity and things like that with the actors?
So in our agreement with our artists, both on stage and off, we make clear in all of our LOAs that streaming is a piece of the work that they are committing to, and we have been adjusting some of the compensation to sort of better reflect the frequency of use of the intellectual property that is the amazing humans who are on stage with us.
Mm-hmm.
But now that we're streaming productions that are having runs in real time during the duration of those runs, we're not doing sort of supplemental payments, as we did when we were streaming out of the vault. When we were streaming out of the vault, we did percentages of gross and all of that. And that was the model at the time, because it seemed like the fairest way to proceed, since we didn't know what the results were going to necessarily be of streaming. So if something did really well, the artists benefited more. And if things were lighter, we were compensating them for the use of their property in the number of times the intellectual property was actually used. When it comes to equity, we have had guest artist agreements with equity in the past. And ironically, when we were doing The Girl Who Swallowed a Cactus, had The Girl Who Swallowed a Cactus been to the Kennedy Center as planned, that would have involved likely filming an equity artist. But since the show had already toured in St. Louis before it was going to go to the Kennedy Center for its run there, we were able to film it with the original artist, who was a non-equity artist. And what is often the case in the TYA space is, with the ratio of our performances tend to be more 10 a.m. Tuesday through Friday, with some public performances. So we have, over time, found more non-equity than equity artists in some of our work. And equity has understandably been working to protect their artists and come up with plans and models for what to do with streaming. And those plans and models have been evolving over the course of the pandemic and have been a little bit of moving targets. So we've made the decision in the short term, until there's a clear guidance from equity to say, here is what we will say is required moving forward for streaming. We don't want to be caught in a situation where we thought it was one thing, and then a new agreement is made, and we now owe retroactive payments for the last 6 months. So it's the most sort of fiscally sound model that we can use, and we're very lucky in St. Louis, particularly in the TYA space, that so many of the artists that we can work with are not currently or are not yet union members. Some of that's because we cast professional actors in youth roles, or in roles, we do not follow age consistent casting. So if in Last Stop on Market Street there was not a second grader playing the role of the grandchild in the play, there was a professional actor. But at some level, people who are recently out of conservatory training programs, who might not yet have their equity cards, are sometimes exactly who you want to play a 15-year-old on stage, because you can suspend that disbelief better than a 45-year-old playing the 15-year-old on stage. So there's reasons why we've been able to effectively cast as we have. I would love to ultimately see a clear and consistent guidance across every form of AEA contract around streaming, so that we would be better equipped to more consistently welcome equity artists back on stage without risk of significant financial penalties for streaming.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a really interesting answer. So I'm very excited for your next production, Spells of the Sea, which will be opening on February 5th and available for streaming from February 16. And I love the best for 8-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and 80-year-olds, and everyone in between. Can you tell us a little bit about that production coming up?
Absolutely. Spells of the Sea is a world premiere musical that we are actively in rehearsal for right now. So if there's any ambient sound while we're talking, it's actors coming in and out around my office. It's a really touching and heartfelt story about a young woman, a 15-year-old girl, who is the daughter of a great fisherman in a town that has had the lighthouse go out. For reasons we learn over the course of the play, the lighthouse keeper turned off the lighthouse 20 years ago. And now Ferris is the only fisherman who can go out in the dark and catch fish to feed the town. And Finley is his daughter. Finley is not the fisherwoman that her father is, and struggles to sort of find herself and to find her voice. And when her father becomes ill with the big bad sickness from the deep dark depths of the sea. I think I got that right. It's a tongue twister almost. There are other tongue twisters intentionally in the show too. She finds out in the spirit of a Moana Encanto-ish world, that there's a way to save her father. She has to get these 3 ingredients to create the elixir of life. The ingredients are a token of her worst fear, a bottle of kindness, and the shell of a princess. And she goes off to sea to find these things. And in the course of doing that, she has to go back into the lighthouse where the light has been turned off. And she finds the lighthouse keeper is still there 20 years later. And over the course of the story, you understand why he turned the light off. And he very, very begrudgingly goes in a boat with her out to sea. And an unlikely friendship and family is sort of formed there. And it's the kind of story that reminds, I think, everyone that we have the potential to do so much more than sometimes we believe we can do. And that if you can sort of really feel your feelings and understand where you are inside and manage that, then you can unlock the doors to so many powerful things. It's got a joyful and fun and wonderful score that Gwenny Govea wrote. Gwenny is, to do a callback to Hamilton from a few minutes ago, Gwenny is sort of pulling a Lin-Manuel Miranda in that she's also starring in Spells of the Sea, which is very exciting, and she's quite magical. And in the spirit of those John Doyle musicals that have played Broadway for a number of years, the cast is also the orchestra. So there are so many really fun musical instruments that are sort of peppered throughout the show. At any given point, there's at least 6 or so instruments being played. So it's very fun. It's very joyful. The design is quite remarkable. Peter and Marjorie Spack are doing our scenic design. It's going to be a very exciting piece. And what's actually especially exciting about it is that we have commercial producers that are involved in looking at the future life of the production. So there is a intent or hope that it's TYA, so it's not going to play at the 1,600 seat Majestic or Music Box, something like that, but that it will have the potential to continue on to a off-Broadway house in New York sometime in the fall. So what's really neat about this production being able to stream is that people from all over the country will get to see this world premiere first, even before people who live in New York will get to see this piece. And I actually think that the streaming model we had was part of the appeal for our producing partners, because by streaming, we're able to help to cast a wider net for who could fall in love with this piece now, which will make it that much easier, hopefully, for it to find the audience that it deserves for many years in a more of an open-ended run somewhere else. So that's the piece. I invite you, whether you are here in St. Louis and can join us in person, or anywhere else in the country and can join us streaming, to check it out, because I think you'll find it will give you all the warm fuzzies for sure.
I cannot wait, and I'm super excited that it will also be coming to New York. See you at Theater Row in the fall.
That is the intent with any commercially enhanced production. One never knows, but that is what everyone has their eyes on, and we will We will see. So stream it and watch it to help us get it to New York is maybe part of the moral of the story.
And there will be links in the show notes to where you can buy tickets. Oh my goodness, I could seriously talk to you for hours on end. Unfortunately, we are a little out of time. So here's my final segment called My Favorite Things, where I ask you my favorite questions. These are a few of my favorite things. To start off with, what is your favorite musical?
The Secret Garden.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that one too. What is your favorite filmed live musical?
Long pause while I think. I have to say Hamilton. I know that it's slick as all get out, but gosh, it's an amazing show. Why not?
Yeah, and I'm so happy they released it. I was shocked when they released it. I thought it was never going to happen, and there it was. Filmed live theater isn't exactly a stage show, and it's not exactly a film. So what should we call it?
Again, pregnant pause while I think of a good answer. I would say a theatrical experience.
Oh, I love that. Where do you stand on bootlegs?
I think bootlegging is terrible and shouldn't happen. I think it is stealing the intellectual property from artists. It's right up there with scalping. I think they're terrible things, and people should please stop.
Wow, that's a big connection there. Which stage musicals do you wish had been filmed?
I would have loved if they had filmed the original production of Ragtime. I would have, and this is now going back so far that it couldn't have happened. I would have loved if they had filmed the original production of Showboat.
Oh.
I've seen photography of that, and the sort of sense of spectacle and what it must have meant to have a musical, like, it's the first true book musical, right? Like, but to feel the audience's energy in filming that, and just to be in the audience and to realize I am watching something that is unlike anything that has been on a stage, at least in this country. And I don't even know what to call it yet, but I like it. I'm sure that you would have felt that on film if it was filmable.
Was that like 1927-ish?
It's 1927 on the dot. Well done.
Hey, because talkies is that period, like talkies are starting to happen, and at that period they were starting to film vaudeville acts as shorts before films. So that's a really interesting, it almost could have happened, but yeah, you're right, it's too early. What would you like to see filmed in the future?
I'm trying to think of what's in New York right now that maybe hasn't been filmed yet. Gosh, what's playing right now that you know what I wish, because I just didn't get to see it because it was too short. Was Paradise Square. I would have loved to have, and maybe that was filmed, and I don't know it was filmed. I wish they filmed the stage version of Dear Evan Hansen. I'm trying to think. I'm sure there's something else. Gosh, what is? Okay, I haven't gotten to see it yet, but I've heard nothing but amazing things. Kimberly Akimbo. I hope they film that.
Me too. So I'm not seeing live theater at the moment because of the pandemic and being afraid of getting sick, and that is one that I'm just desperate to go and see. I likewise have heard nothing but good things. So fingers crossed that they film it. Final question: where can we find you online?
Metro Theater Company is www.metroplays.org.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Joe. This has just truly been so much fun. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
The Filmed Live Musicals podcast is created and edited by our host, Luisa Lyons, with thanks to our wonderful patrons, Josh Brandon, Geraldine Brewer, Belinda Broido, Elliot Charles, Rachel Esteban, Mercedes Esteban Lyons, Luke Hasselman, David Jones, James T. Lane, Heather Madrone, Wendy Marcotte, Alison Matthews, Al Monaco, David Negrin, Amy Penn, Gerald Piper, Jesse Rabinowitz and Brenda Goodman, David and Catherine Rabinowitz, Joe Tillotson, Beck Twist, and Tyson Van Helsing for financially supporting this site. FilmedLiveMusicals.com is the most comprehensive list of film stage musicals. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you would like early access to this very podcast, early access to site content, the full weekly newsletter with info on upcoming streams, and exclusive access to the streaming calendar, become a Filmed Live Musicals patron for as little as $3 a month. Visit FilmedLiveMusicals.com to learn more. If you like what you hear, please leave a review on Apple Music. It really helps get the word out about the show. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thanks for listening.